What is the main thing that Houston needs to do?
Oh, it's obvious. They got to figure out a number two with James Harden, if you're going to keep Harden, who's better than Chris Paul is. Chris Paul is no longer a great player. He is a good player, but not a great one. He's been a great player almost his entire career, but just watch the way he played last season, and he just turned 34 years old. And by the way, it's okay to not be quite what you once were. You lose maybe a half-quarter step, something like that. But then in high-leverage moments, be great. And when they needed Chris Paul late in that series, it didn't even go 7 games. It wasn't just James Harden. It was also Chris Paul who didn't come up big enough. Let's call it what it is. So Chris Paul is now 34. He's going to make 30-something million this year. At the age of 35, and the reason he has a May birthday, Stephen A., but I'm counting that because that's when the playoffs are. The Rockets will be good enough to make the playoffs. The question is, what kind of team do they have for the playoff run? He's going to be 35 next year's playoffs, making $38 million. 36 the following year, making $41 million. The following year, 37 years old. And you would imagine diminished from where he is now, which is already somewhat diminished, making $44 million. How are you going to get a second banana behind James Harden, who's a truly great player at that point, paying a 37-year-old point guard who's already in decline $44 million? You can't. So it's not just that they think Daryl Morey knows he has to trade Clint Capella. I think he understands he needs to use that Clint Capella stuff, that leverage of that value to get out of the Chris Paul deal. Once you do that, you can start targeting either free agents because you've cleared a whole bunch, $50 million of cap space or whatever it is. You can target free agents or at least see what you can get back in that trade that maybe you can repackage for a second banana behind James Harden, who is a truly great player. Harden is not good enough when it matters most to get by the Golden State Warriors even without KD. He needs a crime partner who can get him through those moments. At this point in Chris Paul's career, I don't think CP3 is that guy.
I think you're wrong. And here's why I think you're wrong. Because I think you're giving Mike DAntoni a pass. And that's really what this comes down to. I'm not making the argument that you're wrong in what you've analyzed and dissected about Chris Paul, because I recognize the fact that Chris Paul is basically an elite point guard, but he's not a superstar or secondary offensive option. That shouldn't be the case with him. He's a floor general. That's where his stardom comes from, his ability to run a show, because he's definitely surreal on that level still. The real situation involving the Houston Rockets is the coaching of Mike DAntoni. And I'm just going to call it like that. I'm not saying that this man doesn't deserve to be a head coach in the NBA. I'm not saying he won't win you regular season games or he won't even win you a couple of series. My issue with DAntoni is that his system, the system that he employs, although it's a bit different than what he did in Phoenix, the reality is that Mike DAntoni has proven he's not the guy to get you over the hump to whomever the superstar team is. He's not that dude. It's just that simple. When I look at it, and I'll take Game 6, for example, Max, I don't even have to crystallize all the things that I've seen. I could just pinpoint Game 6. Eric Gordon is balling out throughout the series against the Golden State Warriors. The first 5 games, he's averaging nearly 17 shots a game. He's a focal point of the offense. What happens in Game 6? He shoots 4-10 from the field. He finishes with 9 points. They basically, they didn't even find him to get him the ball, to get him his shots in the fourth quarter or the second half of that game against the Golden State Warriors. Austin Rivers came off the bench, was playing pretty damn well throughout the series. You didn't find him either. Why? Because this is what happens with Mike DAntoni's system, particularly with James Harden. Every single thing has to come through James Harden. And I understand that your criticism about James Harden is legit. Although I would say somebody that's averaged 35, 7, and 5 in a conference final series, I'm not going to sit up there and act like the brother didn't play at all. But he definitely could have come through in those high leverage moments. You're right about that. But when you're playing for a coach like Mike DAntoni, who throws everything to you, every single play, and you're going up against a champion like the Golden State Warriors, you've got to diversify your schemes to some degree. Look at what we're doing in Toronto, raving about Coach Nick Nurse. Why? Because he's had about 22 different starting lineups. I mean, this guy, the adjustments that he's made, the personnel that he's put in, every different series, you know what? You go slow and in the interior against Toronto. You slow it down even more so against Philadelphia, but you lean on Kawhi. You lean on your bench heavily against the Milwaukee Bucks. Adjustments.
Stephen A.
We don't see that with D'Antoni.
Let me get in here. I know you're focused on D'Antoni, but you mentioned Harden. This is what I want to ask you. Can the Rockets win a championship with Harden playing with his style of play?
No, they can't. They can't, because you can't beat true champions in the National Basketball Association with iso ball. You can't do that. They're too gifted. They're too skilled. And by the way, when you are a guy, no matter how great you are, and you engage in a kind of isolation activity that the Houston Rockets gain in, or a bunch of pick and rolls like the Houston Rockets gain in, I should say pick, because there ain't no rolls, because even when James Harden, you're picking for him, he's going to shoot the ball most times. The bottom line is this. You ain't just going up against the players. You're going up against Steve Kerr, who, by the way, is a champion 5 times over as a player and is in his 5th championship as a coach. He knows what he's doing.
I've been plenty critical of Mike D'Antoni when I was doing afternoon drive in L.A. I used to kill him on the air. Mike D'Antoni, don't tell me, there's no D, all this kind of stuff, right? He's getting off the plane. He's already kind of dissing Pau Gasol, talking about him coming off the bench when Gasol looked to still be in his prime because he couldn't shoot the 3. So I understand criticism of D'Antoni. And without Bizdelic, they ain't going to go far in the playoffs either. But when you have Mike D'Antoni and a defensive coordinator, essentially, which everyone always said, why don't you just get a defensive coordinator? You've talked about that on the end of the past. Why didn't they do that in Phoenix? Well, they've done it in Houston. Daryl Morey went and did it in Houston. And since D'Antoni's gotten there, 55 wins, 65 wins, 50-plus wins this year, playoff runs every year. So with Actually, I completely disagree with you about D'Antoni. With D'Antoni, the old adage, you don't know what you have until it's gone, is going to apply. If you get rid of D'Antoni, you better get someone better, and there aren't that many for this Rockets team.
First of all, I don't care about the regular season numbers you brought up about D'Antoni, because I acknowledge that. So there's no disagreement there.